Welcome to another episode of Come Over for Dinner. Today's episode has things a little mixed up with a special guest host in Texas. I also want to acknowledge my music creator, my youngest Max. He keeps me up to date on technology, which I need and am truly thankful for. Stay tuned for an exciting Christmas giveaway at the end of the episode. Happy Thanksgiving, y'all!
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Come Over for Dinner podcast. My name is Serena, and today I'll be your host. Not to worry, though, Bess is here with me, only today she is the special guest, and will be sharing with us all about her go-to meal when having guests over, hot tips on hostessing, her favorite kitchen item, and much, much more. Hello, Bess, and welcome to your podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and be a guest on my own podcast. This is very fun.
It is so exciting to get to show listeners just a little bit about the woman behind the camera. So before we really get into the meal and kind of all your hot tips for us, can you share a little bit about yourself and your own cooking journey?
Okay. Well, first of all, this is a lot of you do know this, but Serena is my daughter-in-law, and she is the host today. I do have 2 daughter-in-laws and a son-in-law. So of my 5 children, 3 are married. And my oldest one is in the Air Force right now. And my youngest one is still at home. He's a teenager in high school still. And of course, I'm married to Brian. And Serena happens to have given me my first granddaughter, and she has a grandson on the way.
Yes, I think 12 weeks today. So
it's so exciting. I can hardly wait. It's just so fun to enter that stage of life. People always tell you how fun it is, and it's just indescribable. So that's a little bit about me. As far as my cooking journey, I would say that the person that taught me how to cook was my mom, and she allowed me to cook as a young girl and taught me, just through the years. So my earliest memory was being allowed to be in the kitchen, and sometimes I was assigned things to do. Other times she just said yes to me wanting to make chocolate chip cookies yet again. So
that's relatable.
Yes, that was my go-to. I always wanted to make chocolate chip cookies. She was very patient and kind to let me use up all of her chocolate chips.
Oh, yes. My mom says since I moved out, they use half the butter that they used before because of my chocolate chip cookie recipe.
Well, with the price of butter nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
They're saving a lot.
A lot better.
So true. And then, of course, as a teenager, it was the big casserole phase. So my mom had a casserole cookbook. And boy, did I use that thing. But looking back, it was probably not good. The casseroles I made out of there were not what I would make today. Part of my cooking journey would be there. I definitely learned through trial and error. There were many times that I failed and I felt like I'm going to do this better. I know I can do this better. And so I would try it again. I think back especially to going to my mother-in-law's house, when I'm first married. And the pressure of taking a dish to the mother-in-law's house. And I'm sure that it was just my own criticism of myself, just being hypercritical of myself, because I do not ever remember her saying something negative. But I remember just being horrified, when I would say for Thanksgiving, bring my sweet potato casserole, which I have been making from the time I was like 12 years old every year. I mean, just so many times. But the problem is that when I was first married, I stuck to the same recipe that I had off of the can or wherever I'd gotten it from, like yams in a can or sweet potatoes in a can, like in heavy syrup. And it's so sugary sweet. And it already has syrup. And so I would use those and didn't realize until I'd cooked for years that it was okay to adjust a recipe. It's okay to cut back on sugar. Maybe instead of using the canned, you can bake your own sweet potatoes. And if you don't like this ingredient, then change it to this. Like I've tried, instead of brown sugar, I've tried maple syrup. I've done so many just variations over the years until I perfected it. That's one thing I would encourage people to do, is just, if you make something and you don't succeed, well, try again. I mean, Ina Garten, who is a huge inspiration to me, once said in an interview, she was asked, well, what's your most challenging recipe? And her response was, I've been working on Boston cream pie for about 3 books, and I haven't gotten the balance and flavors and textures quite right. Do you know how many times she must have made Boston cream pie to, and still be saying that, and still be saying, I still am trying to perfect this recipe.
It's just like you build that confidence over time of, you try, and then you learn from your mistakes, like you said, and then you kind of feel a little more empowered to change things up.
Maybe if it's from a chef that you really like, but for some reason it's just not quite right for your family, it's okay to make changes. Or it's okay to make changes thinking about your audience. Like another recipe that we made growing up, my mom had this cookbook. I think it was a junior league. It reminds me of a church cookbook, but I think it was a junior league cookbook that maybe they put out to, like, as a fundraiser. It was called the Cotton Country Collection. A lot of Southern ladies contributed to this cookbook, and there are a lot of amazing recipes in there. One of them was this chocolate mint brownie recipe. And basically it's a chocolate brownie, and the top is a mint frosting. Well, the gourmet touch is that on top of that real sweet brownie and frosting, you put a real thin layer of unsweetened chocolate. You just melt some unsweetened chocolate. Well, my family growing up, we had 4 girls and my mom and dad, we loved it. And the balance of that unsweet chocolate with the really sweet brownie all blended together and was delicious. Well, I did make this recipe and take it to my mother-in-law's house. She made a comment, something like, oh, that's bitter.
Uh-oh.
And I realized, I don't know if she got an extra dollop of the unsweetened chocolate or if that's just what hit the palate first. I have no idea. But I remember in that instant thinking, most people aren't going to appreciate that unsweetened chocolate like we do. And so when I make them now to take somewhere, I usually use bittersweet. And so it has a hint of sweetness. So if they taste just that little bit of unsweet first, they're not turned off by it. So you kind of have to read your audience too.
Maybe she was so used to the syrupy yam sweet potato casserole that
I ruined her.
Right, Bess couldn't have made that.
Right. She did something wrong. It should be swimming in sugar.
Yes. So fun. So you kind of talked about your mom being very involved with you in the kitchen, and kind of mentioned her as an inspiration for how you started cooking. Growing up and kind of still now, what are your biggest sources of inspiration in the kitchen?
Well, I would definitely say that my parents, if I look back into my past, my mom and my dad was a pastor and he did missions work as well. And together they were very hospitable. They were always a team in that. And just from a young age, there were so many times that there were strangers in our house, strangers to me. My parents would invite a visiting pastor or a visiting pastor's family, a new person that had come to church, or just whoever said yes to their invitation to come over for a meal and fellowship. We were always having people into our home. And I remember as a child having heard the verse or read the verse in Hebrews, I think it's 13:2. It says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. And one of my earliest memories as a young child was wondering which of our guests was the angel.
That is so precious.
I just remember being awestruck by all these new people in our home and having heard that verse and somehow thinking, which one of these people is the angel unaware?
Every time you have a new family over, which one of them?
Which one is the angel?
Oh, that is so sweet.
Oh, So yeah, I would say that they inspired me to hospitality. My mom and dad taught me various things about cooking. When she grew up, she was not raised in a Christian home, and she was not raised by a mother who taught her what she had to learn once she was married and had girls of her own. She had to learn that as a young wife. And she had friends who came alongside her and helped her. But my dad also did. I'm pretty sure she said that he helped her how to cook or know how to cook.
That's so sweet.
But she also talked about just learning through trial and error, kind of like I was talking about earlier. I mean, she tried and she tried again and she tried again. And sometimes there were fails. My mother was gourmet before her time. One of our funny stories was inviting a pastor and his family over, and she had made lentil burgers. I don't even know how to describe them, except it was like a hamburger patty that you put ketchup on top of, or a meatloaf type patty, except she had made it out of cooked lentils with some other ingredients. It has been a joke for years, the lentil burger, because in the deep South, which I don't know if we were deep South, but in the South back in the, I don't know, 90s, early 90s, there were no such thing as lentil burgers. I mean, now in our society, that's probably very gourmet, but no one was quite ready for my mother's lentil burgers.
I would even say, even now in the late 2000s, we are like 2020 era, that's a popular thing, but still in the South, that's still unheard of.
Yes.
I don't think the South has ever kind of accepted lentil burgers or vegan burgers as
right.
A classification of burger, but she was ahead of her time. She was
ahead of her time. She was very health conscious because she wanted to make sure that her girls had good nutrition and all of that sort of thing. So she did teach me a lot, but I also learned techniques from people like Ina Garten. I loved her early cooking shows. Again, when I was first married, I had more time. When I had just maybe one baby or two babies, I did watch some of her cooking shows on Food Network, and I just learned techniques like how to scoop flour and level it off with a knife versus compacting it really tightly like you would brown sugar, because that changes how much flour is in your recipe and it can make it too dense. Or, she talked a lot about how to use a microplane to zest citrus and how much easier it was than peeling it and trying to chop it, which is how I had originally done it. She taught me how to roast vegetables. I mean, there were so many things that I learned just from watching her shows.
Thank you for sharing about yourself. Let's dive into the menu. So whenever you have guests over or are serving, I guess, a big group of people, what is your go-to menu?
One thing that I have made many, many, many times over the years, to us, it's a comfort food, but it can be dressed up or down. And it can be just a really warm, delicious meal to serve people, but you can make it feel a little bit fancy. The recipe is actually called steak and two potato soup, which sounds odd. But I'll explain it to you. So I've kind of tweaked the name, and I really just call it our beef stew, but it's different than just a traditional beef stew, which is probably why this recipe is called soup. But it starts similar to a beef stew. You can buy your own round steak and chop it. That's what the recipe calls for, or not, I guess, cut it into 1-inch pieces. But I typically buy the stew meat, usually a large package of stew meat. And sometimes you have to, if the chunks are really large, you want to make sure they're bite sized. So I look over it and I trim it down, make sure that it's bite sized and that there's no big chunks of fat. This stew or soup originally also did not call for carrots, and I added those in there. It does call for potatoes. The two potatoes are Yukon Gold or red potatoes. I usually do Yukon Gold, and then sweet potatoes. Or a sweet potato. I say sweet potatoes because I often am doubling or tripling or quadrupling this recipe. One thing I have done over the years is actually just add extra Yukon Gold potatoes instead of sweet potato, because not everyone loves sweet potatoes. So if I'm serving this to company, I typically leave those out.
I'm a part of the group that doesn't like sweet potatoes, sadly.
Yes. I mean, you either love them or hate them. So I almost never put them in this soup. Your beef, you have to sear it, and that really gives it some delicious flavor. You have some celery, onion, garlic. I added carrots. So again, it's starting to sound like a beef stew. But the difference at the end is you add in some whipping cream, and it just makes the most delicious broth that you've ever tasted. And for years, another thing the recipe calls for is cheddar cheese. And for years, I added that. At the end, you put in cheddar cheese and cream. It's delicious. But I actually, for the last year or two, have not added the cheddar cheese, and I like it even better. I like it with just the cream. Just something about the texture of the broth. And it's just, that's all it needs is that cream. So,
and you can individually add the cheese on top. I mean, couldn't you do that? I guess do that if they do prefer it, but
absolutely,
it really tastes better without the cheese in it.
Absolutely. Yes, you could serve it on the side. Another reason I don't prefer to put the cheese is because I'll tell you my entire menu. I do serve a salad with it that has cheese on it. And so I guess maybe that's also why I pulled the cheese off. But to serve this down, you don't have to serve a separate salad. You could just have your soup that has the potatoes, carrots, meat, and your bread. And you can skip the salad. But when I have company over and I'm just wanting to make it a little bit nicer, I will plate the salad and have it on the table first. And so when they come in, it's already on the table. And then later I'll go to the stove, or somebody will be serving from the stove. They'll be serving up bowls of hot soup and passing them out. Yeah, so I'll post the recipe to this salad, and it's actually one of our very favorite salads. It's actually a lunch salad. It was a grand prize winner, I think maybe on Food Network. It's called Maple Pecan Chicken Salad, and it's the best salad ever to serve for lunch or brunch. But I serve it at the beginning of the meal, but I take the chicken out, and I think I usually take the bacon off. It has bacon. So I just serve it as you make your own homemade dressing and your own sugared pecans and spinach and romaine and some sliced red onion, some grapes and cheddar cheese. So good. It's delicious. And it's always a hit with kids.
I can attest. I'm not the grown-up I should be in eating, greens with every meal, but I have to say, whenever I've had this salad at your house, I will clean the plate, which is a miracle, because I typically don't do that with salads, but there's something about the dressing that mixes with just the tang of the red onion and the grapes. If they're either sweet or sour, each one's kind of different, but it's just this mix of sweet and salty and the crunch. It's just it has everything in it that you would want in a salad to make it not just taste like dry spinach.
Yes. The dressing has a little bit of maple syrup in it. The pecans, when you make it, they're a sweet pecan. They have brown sugar and maple on them. And then you have red grapes that give it a little bit of sweetness. But again, like you said, because the dressing obviously has some oil and vinegar and some other ingredients, just that balance is so delicious. But kids absolutely love it because they recognize grapes and cheddar cheese and maple syrup.
Yeah.
It gives them some sweetness. I have a pecan recipe that is out of this world. It is called sweet and salty pecans. And you actually bake them in the oven.
Yes, you sent that one to me. I think that's the one I used.
I never make, I'll have to put these on here because I actually, looking at this, I never make the pecan version of this recipe because the sweet and salty pecans are over the top. They are just
remember
so
you
good.
sending 2 different emails. I'm going back and looking at them right now because you, I think you included the
updated version.
Yes.
Okay. I must be looking at it when I haven't updated. The sweet and salty pecans can be set out in a dish to be served as an appetizer or at a party. They are a huge hit. You can make them ahead of time. With this salad, you can prep all of these ingredients the day before, or even the pecans can be made multiple days before. And yes, they're just magical. You just have to try them to believe them. They're just amazing on top of this salad, but they're amazing to eat.
I know.
Themselves.
I think that's why I hadn't included it in the salad I did, because it was like going to be used for something else, maybe just for eating.
Yes. They disappear fast. You can eat too many of them. I have done that before.
Back to the soup. You did say you use the stew meat instead of the round eye. Now, does that make it more tender? Correct me if I'm wrong, isn't stew meat a little more tender and less chewy than the beef round eye?
Well, the recipe does call for round steak, and I'm not sure. I did have a friend who once worked at Sam's Club in the butcher department or the meat department, and he said that the stew meat was often end pieces. So it was a random mixture of things. You weren't quite sure. Sometimes it could be very high quality steaks, that they just couldn't. It was an end piece maybe that was too small or misshapen, or I don't know how it all worked. But there were times that I would come and he was working and he would be like, you need to buy this stew meat because it's really high quality steak or something.
I will be making friends with my local butcher because I want to know when to get the stew meat, the good stew meat
quality. Well, I think the key with this is that you cook it low and slow. That's the key for tenderizing beef chunks, and making it really just melt in your mouth. Is just you simmer it like this recipe. After searing it, you actually simmer it for an hour and then add some potatoes in and then simmer it maybe about 30 minutes more. All of your work is really front loaded. Once after you get everything kind of sauteed and in the pan, you just really walk away and it simmers for a very long time.
That is so wonderful. I think you were saying something earlier. I might have interrupted you.
I was just going to say to finish off the menu there, we serve bread, and homemade bread is amazing. But the shortcut that I will tell you is the easiest, fastest bread imaginable. And don't tell your guests about it, or at least don't apologize for it. I'm sure every store has French bread. Walmart has different types of French bread loaves. There's one called, what is it called? The everything bread, where it just has a lot of seasonings on top.
Kind of like the everything but the bagel seasoning.
Maybe.
That's what it's named after.
I bet that's what it is. But it doesn't even matter. That's actually kind of my favorite, but there's been many times they are out, or, if I have ordered it, they've substituted something else. You can get it pre-sliced or you can slice your own. But really all you need is basically a type of French bread. If you're slicing your own, slice it into thinnish to medium thin slices and lay it out on a baking pan, a cookie sheet, whatever you have, and put some butter on each piece. Sprinkle them all with kosher salt and pepper. Don't make the butter super thick, but a small amount of butter on each piece. You don't want to be making it real rich. But once you sprinkled your kosher salt and pepper, right as the guests are getting there, or right as you're about to serve your soup hot from the stove, you throw your pans, and you may have to rotate. Usually if I have a big crowd, I'm doing at least 3 pans of bread because bread goes fast. But you just put those in an oven on broil. So I usually use a high broil. That means do not walk away from the stove. If you start talking, that bread is going to be burnt. You have to. Don't ask if I know this from experience.
I've done that way too many times.
Yeah. So it will be done in 30 seconds, a minute and a half. Just watch it. But all you're doing is toasting it. That bread disappears faster than any bread you can ever put in front of your guests. It is so delicious. It's soft, but yet crunchy because of the top that you just broiled. And it's just delicious with soup. It's just delicious. And it's instant. Now, you can make your own homemade bread. And there is a recipe that was shared with me recently that I will post. The last time that we had company, I actually had both. I felt like I'm going to try this bread, this, homemade recipe. But just in case it doesn't turn out, I also ordered some but we ended up serving both, and both disappeared. The homemade bread I made was actually a recommendation from a friend. We had when my son Lex proposed to Bill, the last son to get married, we had a surprise dinner at Rachel Jankovic's house, Bill's aunt, and she had made the most delicious bread. And maybe she found the cookbook, or maybe it was recommended to her from a friend, but it was called Bread Toast Crumbs, I think by Alexandra Stafford. And it says recipes for no-knead loaves and meals to savor every slice. And I believe I found a version of this recipe online. She has a website or blog, but inside this cookbook, it's called, the recipe she made and that I tried, which is absolutely delicious, is called the Peasant Bread Master Recipe. And this is a recipe that her mom made that she has been making and just adds to it. So this is like the master recipe, the basic bread, but I think in the cookbook, she makes lots of variations. But this recipe can be found online. So I will post it, or post a link to it, because even online, she talks about ways that you can make it slightly differently and in different, like she makes her bread in a bowl, like a round loaf, but I only had loaf pans. And so she tells how to adapt the cooking time and that sort of thing. So that was a very delicious homemade recipe. And then
they're full.
And it was so easy to make.
Okay, good. I was going to ask, I've heard on a previous episode, you mentioned that dessert is a must in your house. So is there anything with this meal that you would typically serve for dessert?
Well, absolutely. One of my very favorites. Again, this is so easy. I have made it so many times. This is actually one of my most requested recipes, and it's embarrassing how easy it is when I tell people. Actually, I love telling people that, like, you really can recreate this. It's so simple, because I've had, someone say to me, I don't cook. I don't know if I could make this. I'm like, no, you can. Trust me. I found this recipe in I term it by colors. It's the Yellow Gourmet Cookbook. I'm sure it has a slightly different title, but the Gourmet, the magazine, website, company, put out a cookbook years ago. And in this book, they have what's called pecan pie bars. And if you like pecan pie, if you don't like pecan pie, you will love the pecan pie bars. And what is amazing about it is instead of a pie that you have to cut and plate and serve with a fork, these are like brownies. You cut them into squares and you can eat them as a finger food. You don't have to have anything fancy. I mean, you could use a fork, but absolutely not necessary. So I have taken them all over the place, from, potlucks or church events to a friend's home, or we just serve them and we have people over. They're perfect for fall. At Thanksgiving, I honestly like these better than pecan pie.
And did you say the recipe is a little easier than making an actual traditional pecan pie?
I think it is, because with pie, you get real worried about crusts.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to really be good at crust.
What is the base of these bars instead of the pie crust?
It's a shortbread. It's a shortbread base. They call it a hot shortbread base. And so if you've ever made shortbread, it's basically butter, flour, sugar, and salt. And theirs is a light brown sugar. So the easiest thing to do is to use a food processor and blend all of those ingredients together. And then you just dump it into a 13 by 9 pan. You don't have to grease it or anything, because you have quite a bit of butter in your shortbread, a lot of butter in shortbread, which is why it's so delicious.
Yes. Sounds like a lot less hassle.
Yes. And then the recipe says, in your same food processor, you can chop your pecans. I prefer to chop them by hand because, I'm just not usually making a giant amount. It's easy to chop. I think it calls for about 2 cups of pecans. I like it because it makes it the exact size I want. And so I did chop it in a food processor a time or two, and I ended up making them too small for what I wanted, but it doesn't matter. That's just preference. And then on the stovetop, you melt some butter and stir in brown sugar, honey, and cream, and simmer that for just about a minute. Dump your pecans in, and then you pour that mixture over the hot shortbread that you baked in the oven. And then you bake another 20 minutes and you're done.
That sounds so delicious.
It's so easy, and you just have to try them to believe them. Again, I have had more requests for this recipe than probably any other dessert I've made. So for the holidays, this is one you need to pull out and try.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this delicious menu with us. Now, I think we all would love to hear a funny story or experience that you've had in the kitchen or when it comes to cooking or hostess.
You know, a lot of my stories come from being first married, oddly enough. A lot of growth has happened over the years, but
it's a humbling time.
Right. So we lived in a home that had a gas heater with a grate in front of it to kind of keep you from burning yourself. But it was in the dining room. And I think we must have had a couple of children, maybe just 2 at the time. But my oldest was a toddler, probably had a baby too. And he loved balls of any kind. I mean, baseball, basketball, football. You just give him a ball and he was happy as could be. He threw balls all the time. We even had like a little basketball goal set up. I think probably in that dining room. He was probably playing basketball while I cooked dinner. All of a sudden, I'm in the kitchen and there's black smoke. And I don't know exactly how we discovered it, or, because he's maybe pointing, talking. I don't know if he was trying to tell us. All I know was all of a sudden I'm flying out of the kitchen into the dining room and I see my husband grabbing this burning basketball and heaving it out a nearby window. And we're both coughing and choking and black smoke. And I didn't realize too at the time that all these little black bits were floating around in the air. And what it was the basketball, rubber that had been burning. So accidentally, my son had thrown the ball and it had bounced and gone in between the grate and the heater elements. And the basketball had caught on fire.
Oh my word.
Well, to make the story better, company was walking in the door in like 30 minutes.
Of course they were.
These were pre-salad spinner days, or at least I didn't know about salad spinners. And I had been dutifully washing the lettuce. We were going to have a big salad, and who even knows what else was on the menu, but we were definitely going to have a big salad. But my lettuce leaves were drying all over the counters in the kitchen. So I had laid out some towels. I'd washed the lettuce really, really well, but they were, kind of air drying on the counter. And I was just about to chop them up and make a salad. Well, then the drama with the basketball happens and we get it kind of under control. Everything's fine. We're opening windows and fans, trying to get the smoke out of the room and all these little black bits that were floating around. And I walk back in the kitchen and there are black bits of rubber all over my lettuce.
Not pepper flakes. This is black bits of rubber from the
right. If only it was pepper. And I realized I couldn't feed my guests basketball.
That was not on the menu.
Right. Basketball rubber is not on the menu. So we threw all the lettuce in the trash, and it's just not a great start. So they come, we end up having dinner. I'm trying to be a good hostess. I'm new to this. And we decided to pull out a game. We had a back porch that kind of just had a screen door. It wasn't really, I don't know, it was part of the house, but more of an outside room. But there was a little storage spot, and we had just recently had a cat who had kittens. We bring in a game to play with our company, and we open the box, and I don't know if the lid was torn. I do not even know how a kitten got inside the box. There must have been like part of it was a part of the box was torn where it kind of slithered up inside there. We opened the box in front of the company to pull out this game to play. And the cat had turned it into a litter box. I was mortified.
My word.
There was kitten poop in the game. And I just remember thinking, no one will ever want to come to my house again. I am terrible at this. I am terrible at hostessing. How did my mother make it look so easy? And of course, I had to just pull myself up by the bootstraps and smile and continue to be a good hostess. But I did learn that the way she made it look easy is because she did it over and over and over. Whether we lived at a nice, newly built brick home or in a double wide trailer, she invited family, friends, the church family, the stranger who showed up at church. It didn't matter. And I don't ever remember her one time being embarrassed to have people into her home or acting like hosting at our beautiful brick home was any different than when she was hosting at the double wide. In fact, I had forgotten this, but we had rented a double wide trailer in the process of them wanting to buy a home. And I just saw a picture where there's the church people. We had tables set up and people are all out on lawn chairs and having a great time. Just, I don't even know, maybe we had a big potluck, or maybe my dad had the grill out and people brought the sides. And it was a smaller church. It wasn't hundreds of people, but regardless, didn't matter. Again, back to my inspiration, my parents.
What a wonderful role model and inspiration for, what it looks like to be a Christian woman, confident and secure in her identity, and just having a heart that is so willing to serve others and to just put yourself out there. That's just so inspiring.
Yes. And she taught me, and God has taught me through lots of stories like the one I just shared with you, that it's not about me. It's just not about me. When we give to others, we're serving others.
And some of those others might be angels.
Yes. We're not. Which one of you is an angel?
Yes.
Which one of my guests is an angel unawares?
So while we're on the topic of hostessing, what are your top tips for creating an environment in your house that is welcoming to guests and kind of preparing your home for company?
The number one thing for me, and I do think that people have different personalities and you just have to work with what works best for your family. For me, it really helps to prepare ahead. And so I know this has been mentioned lots of times before, but I try to think about what can I do days ahead of time, kind of have a little bit of a timeline up into that day. Mm-hmm. But again, that's what works for me right now. And part of that is where I am in my life. I don't have a whole lot of kids that I can rely on to jump in and help me. It looked different when I had 5 teenagers at home who I could, assign a job to every one of them 2 hours before company shows up and we're flying around and getting it all done. Now it might be all me. If my son is gone and my husband's at work and my son's gone to a sports practice or school or whatever it is, it may be, okay, I need to clean the bathroom and I need to make the soup and I need to slice the bread and I don't have all my teens around to help. And sometimes I do have Max or Brian, and they definitely are willing to pitch in, but that helps me. And my last small tip to go along with that is when I get to talking, I forget things. And so I like to have just a real short list of all of the things that are a part of my meal. Like, for instance, if I was going to serve this menu, I would write down soup, bread, salad, dressing, like all grapes, cheese, yes. If they were building their own salad, which actually I would have already built the salad for them on that particular one. But let's say that I set a salad out where I was just like a salad bar, lettuce, tomatoes, bell peppers, sunflower seeds, homemade ranch dressing, cheese, bacon bits. If I had lots of different elements, I would actually kind of write them all down. So at the very last minute, when I'm pulling them out of the fridge, I don't forget something.
That is so smart, because I I have made dinner before, and thankfully this wasn't for guests, but I got everything out. We ate, and I think it was like meatloaf, mashed potatoes. I don't know how I forgot, but I did remember the next morning when I was preheating the oven and started smelling burning asparagus that I did not. I didn't have a checklist. I did not pull that out of the oven the night
Oh,
before. We
no.
didn't have asparagus with our meatloaf and potatoes, but we did have it burnt, wafting throughout the house during breakfast time the next morning.
It was in the oven the entire night.
Yes, thankfully the oven was off, but it was just sitting there. I mean, I had cooked it and just left it in there to stay warm, and I didn't have the checklist of, hey, this is a part of
That
dinner.
is hilarious. That is so funny. Well, I think that's why I started making this checklist, is because I have done that. I would inevitably open the oven or the microwave or the refrigerator and realize, oh, like say for the salad, I completely forgot to set the cheese out,
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess when you talk about like my home being warm and welcoming, it's more for me to be able to quickly, right as they get there or right before they get there, quickly set things out and be ready to welcome them instead of
You can get in the present.
Yes, exactly. Instead of my mind racing as they're entering the room and I'm greeting them, I'm not thinking, okay, now go through my list really quick. What do I need to set out? Or do I have everything out? It's like, no, I have it all written down. I've thought about it when I'm not busy. And if I don't have it out all already, I can just glance at that, pull out the last couple of things and not feel stressed, or I can still be talking and visiting and greeting guests. And it's just easier, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's such a good tip. I love that. One question I had, and I'm sure many of our guests do, is what inspired you to start this podcast? And I'm kind of curious, how long has it been in the workings? Is this something that was just a kind of a all of a sudden you just thought of it recently, or have you been kind of had this in your mind for a couple years? Tell us about your inspiration to start it.
Okay. Well, actually, I have had it in my mind for a couple of years. I have been inspired by other people and have learned so much from so many people who are already doing an excellent job talking about hospitality. Recently, Rachel Jankovic hosted a webinar called Culture Building at Home, where she discusses what the Bible has to say about welcoming people into your home. And in that webinar, she offers practical suggestions as well. Her parents, Doug and Nancy Wilson, have encouraged hospitality for years. My mom, I remember, was inspired by hearing about Nancy Wilson's Sabbath dinner, and she started doing a regular weekly family dinner. Many families have been inspired by their tradition of hosting a Sabbath dinner every week. And so throughout the years, I have gained so much wisdom from people wiser than me who were already talking about hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, what made me start this podcast, I love details, and I'm the type of person who wants to know, what's your favorite recipe that was such a smashing success when you had all that company over? Tell me how you did it. What did you serve? And, you have this beautiful tablecloth and napkins, and you said you found it at such a great price. Well, where? So
Yes,
I love gleaning from people, their wisdom. My podcast, of course, focuses on the practical application of hospitality from so many people who are experienced in throwing open their doors and welcoming people into their home. And all of these hosts did not start out as experts. Like any skill, they had to learn it and they practiced it and perfected it. Or maybe they wouldn't say they perfected it, because we all continue to have disaster stories. But like an athlete or musician practices over and over and over to perfect their craft, someone who hosts people does the same thing. And we never really stop learning. There's always something to improve at or to learn. You get better at it, and it's a lot of fun. And I love hearing from people who inspire me to do better and to learn even more. And I love to know their favorite things, like, their favorite pie recipe or their favorite bread recipe or their favorite soup recipe. It's fabulous to have that kind of wisdom to share with all my podcast listeners.
Absolutely. And you're not alone in that desire to know more. I think we all kind of, whether we are vocal about it or not, we all do want to know, where they got this, and any tips and tricks. I have been a hostess several times, and just go looking forward to the future, to becoming better at that. I'm always wanting to learn as well, and it's just super super wonderful to have this podcast to give us wanting, I guess, knowledge seekers, or detail oriented people, just a look into different people's experience, different people's culture even. And
Yes.
it's just, there's so many different backgrounds that come together to just create an array of different little bits of wisdom that, I
Yes.
might know some things that some people share, but others are completely new, and it's just so wonderful.
Well, and what I love about it too is it's like apples and oranges. People have different ways of doing things, and they're not wrong. So, for instance,
Mhm.
some people have recommended greeting your guests at the door, and other people, stopping what you're doing, go to the door, greet your guests. And other people have talked about how their children and husband welcome the guests, and the guests, are directed to the kitchen, and they greet them at the kitchen with a glass of wine. Or it's not wrong either way. And so what I
Right.
love about it is that people offer different tips and ideas and practical suggestions that works for them, that they really like. And then whoever listening can take that and think, well, what fits my personality? What do I like? What would work in my family? And just create a type of hospitality that is unique to them and their situation.
Yes, absolutely. So, kind of speaking about those differences, I know you've had a big change. I don't know if you can consider South, North and South different cultures. I don't for lack of a better word, what kind of cultural differences have you noticed when it comes to cooking and hostessing, moving from Arkansas in the South up to Moscow, Idaho in the North?
Yes. Well, I'm not quite sure because I am new to the North, and I know that they have lots of different types of food and a culture here that I am not fully aware of and don't fully appreciate yet, which is another reason I love hosting this podcast, is because I'm learning
Yes.
some of the fun things. The difference is that I would notice, like, of course, moving to any new town, a big difference is stores and brands. And there's a lot of things that are the same. But I know when I first moved here, I felt like I wandered for far too long in the grocery store. Like, why is this grocery trip taking hours? Felt like I was in a time warp. I did get through that. I remember finally breaking down and asking a complete stranger who looked at me like I was crazy for speaking to her. But I asked a total stranger, where are the frozen blueberries? And she kindly did point them out to me. I think that's always a challenge when you move somewhere new. It takes a bit to adapt to your surroundings. But
Yes.
it's been fun to also notice local ingredients in the grocery store or at farmers markets that I have rarely used, if ever. Rhubarb is one of them. People make rhubarb pies or rhubarb strawberry pies. And I don't remember ever being able to buy rhubarb in the South. I sure know we did not grow it.
I've
So,
never seen it in Walmart here or
no,
any other store.
no. So it's exciting to see different ingredients and try new things, or maybe even introduce the people up here to Southern things like fried okra. I'm determined to figure out how to, batter and fry my own okra to introduce people to fried okra. Like, that's the
Yes,
only
fried
way to
okra
eat okra.
with some fried steak and gravy and mashed potatoes.
That's right. In fact, I don't know that there might be one up here. There was like is it Chicken Express down south, where the pretty much the only thing you can order is fried chicken, fried okra, fried French fries, fried hush puppy,
Corn fritters. Oh yeah,
corn
fried.
fritters. So that's probably a difference too. There's a lot of fried food in the South, although people are getting more health conscious. But, in this community, there's, the South used to have this reputation for hospitality. And I think we've gotten away from that. In this community, there is such a strong sense of warm and welcoming hospitality. They're very open handed with their hospitality, which is a rare thing to find anywhere. Even in the South, we have shifted away from gathering around a table to share a hot meal with family, friends, or even strangers. And so many people end up eating in front of the TV or on the run. We do gather at holidays, but we need to return to family meals at the dinner table where friendships are created and deepened. On my website, I say, for centuries, it was customary to invite others into your home, including traveling strangers. Our culture and society have shifted away from this, but much has been lost. Friendships deepen, encouragement is found, and fond memories are made amid laughter, delicious food, and friends. Thinking through that as a Christian, God has called us to show love to others through hospitality. First Timothy 5 talks about a woman who has been faithful. They are referring to widows, but one of the marks that she has been faithful in her life is that she has a reputation for good works. And one of those good works is that she has shown hospitality. She's washed the feet of saints, she's cared for the afflicted, and she has devoted herself to every good work. But in there, it talks about her showing hospitality. And Romans 12:13 says, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality.
That's a command by God. And I don't think we think about that often as not just a suggestion, but that's a command.
Exactly. So our culture has moved away from that. And yet the command is very clear in Scripture to not do so. And hospitality is mentioned so many times that I think it's so important for Christians to think about it and to have a plan to practice it. Figure out how, okay, we need to do this. How?
So you mentioned your mom being a big source of inspiration, both in the kitchen and in hostessing. Growing up, was there anything specific that she instilled into you that you've passed on to your children and hope to see continued in the next generation?
Well, one thing I'll mention in particular is manners. My mother taught all of her girls manners. I highly recommend Emily Post's book called Etiquette. I have the 17th edition. It was redone by her great granddaughter-in-law, Peggy Post. And etiquette is just simply a code of behavior based on thoughtfulness. And so if you are looking to improve your knowledge of social etiquette or to teach your children how to present themselves, this is a great resource. Some schools offer this as a class. Logos School, where my youngest attends, did protocol training recently with their teenagers, followed by a protocol dinner where the students had a chance to practice what they had learned at a formal dinner and concert afterwards. So my son was able to practice opening doors for a young lady. He gave a toast, which did prepare him to give another one at his brother's rehearsal dinner later that summer. And hopefully he also ate with all of the manners he had learned in protocol training during dinner. So my mother was very good at teaching her girls manners and things like sending thank you notes and just showing thoughtfulness to others through that. And so I would highly recommend, if a class isn't offered where you are, do one on your own. I did a class for my kids around the dining room table, and they were not thrilled about this idea. I had 4 boys and 1 girl. So I invited their friends over and they all suffered, learned together. And this made it a lot more fun. I have used this book as a reference many times to get ideas for myself on how to maybe word an invitation or rules, such as like when you're supposed to tip or when you're not supposed to tip, the correct way to make an introduction when you are introducing 2 different people to each other that don't know each other. There is a lot of wisdom in this book. And I'm sure some of it has changed. I would recommend getting the most recent edition and just going through there and seeing what would be really important to pass on to your children.
That is so wonderful. And it really is noticeable when you do meet, especially like you said, teenagers with those, I was going to say skills, but it's more of a character trait just instilled in them by their parents or by their elders. It's noticeable to their peers and to other adults around that, this is a respectable young man or young woman, not just a careless
Yes,
teenager. It helps earn respect.
Yes, when children and teenagers and eventually young adults know how to present themselves, they really do stand out, because in our culture, that is a rare thing. Mothers are not teaching their children to show love through manners. One of my sons once asked me, why are we doing so many things to get ready for company coming over? Why do I have to put my napkin in my lap? Why are you telling me all these things? Isn't this fake? Why can't we just be real? And my response was that, yes, we do have real life happening all the time. We do have muddy shoes, a bathroom that needs to be clean, or dishes that need to be washed. It isn't fake to work to set all of these things back in order and to have a home that looks nice. But also, while we do this continually on a daily basis for our family, when we invite others over, we are making an extra push to have all those things done at once, hopefully, so that we can show love to others. But manners is also a part of that. That's why I teach my children manners. And I told my son this, no one wants to come into our home and see you chewing with your mouth open, or burping out loud, or, whatever it is. When you learn to present yourself, and of course the joke is, you never know, one day you may be eating with the president or of the queen,
or your future wife.
Exactly. Or your future wife's parents.
Yes.
And if you show yourself to be the type of person who is ill-mannered, it reflects on your character, whether you think it does or not. It does reflect. And so you do want to present yourself well. You want to know how to speak well, use table manners, and prepare. Just make sure that you're like that in life. But again, preparing your home, I told him, guests want to walk in and have a meal where they're not seeing your food. They also don't want to see an overflowing trash can or a home that looks like they weren't prepared for at all. The effort we put in tells those that are invited over they've been thought of, they've been prepared for, and they are welcome.
Such wonderful tips, advice, wisdom. I think I need to grab a copy of that book for sure.
Oh, one more thing I will mention. Another thing that is so important to have your children practice is, especially toward adults, that are walking into your home, look them in the eye, say hello, shake their hand. If somebody comes over, greet them. Don't hide behind the counter or pretend they're not there and let mom and dad do all the greeting. And the age varies, depending on who it is. A 2-year-old may not be shaking a hand, but if you have a 14-year-old or an 11-year-old, they need to be able how to do a greeting and speak and look someone in the eye and introduce themselves. And I remember when my children were little, we practiced at home before guests ever came over. They were greeting each other in the dining room. So they could do it, and they weren't afraid when the door opened and a stranger walked in, or what felt like a stranger, a tall, large person from church.
Yeah,
they were ready. And it gets easier. It gets easier. Once kids practice, it just becomes so much easier.
Yes, it becomes second nature. You don't have to, think it out.
Right.
So good. Okay, so last question is, what is your must-have kitchen item?
Well, this goes back to the salad laid all over the counters to dry. And it also, I guess, ties into my menu, because I often do serve salad when people are coming over. An absolute must-have kitchen item is a salad spinner. So you definitely want to wash your lettuce. And once it is washed really well, you really need to get it dry. And the very fastest way to do it is a salad spinner. You just chop it up or tear it up, whatever your method is, as if you're ready to serve it. Well, that's how I do it. I don't actually rinse it and then put it in the salad spinner. I chop it up, put it in the salad spinner basket. It has holes in it like a colander, and rinse it really, really well. And then you put that basket into your bowl, and then the lid on top has a spinner in it. The way it connects, it spins it really fast and shakes all the water out of it, and the water goes into the bottom of the bowl. So then you just dump that out, and you can actually serve out of the salad spinner bowl if you wanted to, or you could put it in another serving bowl. For years, I had a regular salad spinner. I love that OXO brand, OXO. For years, I just had the regular salad spinner. It's a plastic bowl. And I think it cracked after a long time of use. So I would say I got my money's worth. But when I went to reorder, they have a stainless steel salad spinner, meaning that the bowl is a stainless steel bowl. The other parts are plastic, like the colander type thing that sits inside. I absolutely love it. It is worth the extra money because you have a stainless steel bowl that you can, if you want to, dump your salad in. You can serve out of it. But the other thing I love about it is that stainless steel bowl will not crack. It will last forever. If in a pinch you need an extra mixing bowl, you have one. It's just my favorite. So my must-have kitchen item is the stainless steel salad spinner from OXO.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and your go-to meal with us. I think all of our listeners will be so excited to have this going into the holiday season. And we just want to say happy Thanksgiving to everyone listening.
Thank you so much for interviewing me, Serena. It was so much fun. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. This week, I am hosting a giveaway on Instagram, come.over.for.dinner. My friend Becca has her website up just in time for Christmas, where you can order some fabulous Christmas gifts. Check out RebeccaMerkle.com. Rebecca is spelled with a K, RebekahMerkle.com. The giveaway will be one set of her 100% cotton dish towels. The winner can choose either the Cobalt set or the OG set. Check out my Instagram page for all the details. Oh, one last thing. Max and his friend Simeon have started a sports podcast. Right now, they are talking all things football. They break down the NFL matchups, report the latest news and injuries, and a lot more. It's called Ballin' Dogs. BALLIN'_DAWGS. Ballin' Dogs. It's a lot of fun. So if you have any teens interested in football or someone of any age for that matter, tell them to check it out.